Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into some seriously fascinating source material all about the syntactic foundation of reality. Basically, we're going to act like philosophical detectives and take a literal descent down the staircase of reality to try and find its absolute bedrock. So let's just jump right in and see how this text breaks down the actual mechanics of how we understand existence itself.
Real quick, here's the map for our descent today so we don't get lost. First up, explaining our explanations. Second, the limits of physics. Third, the explanatory regress to zero. And finally, we'll wrap up with teleolosis and syndephonomic regression.
All right, Section 1, explaining our explanations and the whole problem with our surface-level assumptions.
To ground ourselves before we get a little too deep here, let's just start with a super simple, everyday question. Why do birds fly? I mean, it seems obvious, right? You'd probably give a standard, reflexive response without even really thinking about it.
You'd probably say something like, well, because they have wings. But as the text points out, that is actually a totally incomplete explanation. Stopping there is kind of this huge conceptual trap. So yes, we are getting incredibly meta right out of the gate here. We literally have to explain our explanations.
And this brilliantly illustrates a core problem highlighted in our source material. In science, absolutely everything requires an explanation, even the explanations themselves. Until a theory fully explains itself, it's really just passing the buck, you know? It's just relying on a bunch of external assumptions and hasn't really been explained at all.
I mean, think about why that wings answer fails. It completely leaves out atmospheric resistance. It gives zero mechanics on how wings actually interact with the air to enable flight. It just blindly assumes that wings, well, just inherently work. The theory is true as far as it goes, sure, but as a foundational truth, it totally collapses.
Moving on to Section 2, the limits of physics, or peeling back the layers of materialism.
So if our simple everyday observations aren't enough, we've got to peel back a layer to the hard sciences, the stuff we usually trust as our ultimate foundation. Take evolutionary biology, for instance. To truly explain organic phenomena, biology really doesn't stand on its own. It leans heavily on the deeper underlying molecular dynamics provided by quantum chemistry and physics to actually explain how things work.
But here is the truly shocking part from our source material. Physics itself, it's not self-contained. Because observable physical reality isn't a complete model, claiming that a purely materialistic interpretation gives us the full picture is, to quote the text directly, prima facie absurd. It's literally still just a layer relying on even deeper assumptions.
Physics might describe the rules, but it's fundamentally a non-self-explanatory theory. Think about it. Even if you use physics to explain biology, and you use natural selection to explain life, well, you still have to explain the natural selection of the laws of physics themselves. We still have to explain where the universe and the actual rules of the game came from in the first place. Physics cannot be the absolute bottom.
Which brings us to Section 3, the explanatory regress to zero, our search for a self-explanatory bedrock.
So, to actually find this self-explanatory bedrock, we have to go deeper down the staircase into what the text calls the explanatory regress. It's like a giant puzzle. Think of every theory as a step. Ti plus 1 is our surface theory. But that has to be reduced to step Ti, which is the deeper, supporting theory. And this downward chain reaction only stops when we finally hit T0, which is the absolute, ultimate, self-explanatory foundation.
As we move down these steps, the source describes the process as a regressive unbinding of progressive informational constraints. Now, what does that actually mean? In simpler terms, we are literally ripping open these closed theoretical packages. We're unbinding them, stripping away the assumptions that hold those surface-level theories together and reducing them to way more basic concepts.
And that brings us straight to T0. Now, what's really interesting here is that this isn't just another layer of physics or math. T0 represents the absolute conceptual bedrock of existence. It is the definitive floor where this explanatory regress finally ends, simply because the theory finally explains itself. There are literally no more assumptions left to unbind.
All right, Section 4, telesis and syntephionic regression, the ultimate syntactic code of the universe.
So, you're probably wondering, what does this bedrock actually look like when we reach the very bottom of the staircase? Well, we completely leave behind those incomplete, non-self-explanatory physical models. According to the text, the T0 foundation is built purely on self-transducing information and a closed syntactic structure. It's like reality itself becomes a language, a self-processing code that acts as a template for everything. When we hit that absolute bottom floor, what is it actually made of? Well, the source calls it telesis. Telesis is essentially the raw informational and cognitive potential we reach when things just cannot be reduced any further without completely losing intelligibility. I mean, before structure even exists, before infocognition, there is just this raw, unbridled potential. That is telesis.
And we can actually put a name tag on the incredible journey we just took. The process of reducing all those distinct objects and rules of our universe down to a totally uniform, homogeneous syntactic medium, that is known as syntaphonomic regression. It's basically the process of finding the absolute ultimate common denominator of everything in existence.
Now, a key part of that regression is something called unisection. Through unisection, structural rules are reduced to a syntactic join. This basically implies that structural rules aren't separate from the reality they govern. It means all the incredible, wildly diverse properties we experience in our universe are actually just innate properties of the underlying medium itself. It's like the canvas is actually what dictates the painting.
This incredibly deep foundation dramatically shifts how we view the universe, right? Instead of having millions of separate mysteries, it reduces all the mysteries of how complex things emerge, things like life, consciousness, or entire galaxies, down to just two fundamental questions. First, how are these emergent properties already anticipated in the syntactic structure of their medium? And second, why are they only expressed under specific conditions, like when you reach a certain degree of systemic complexity?
Which leads us to our final stop today. And I really want to leave you with this mind-bending thought to ponder. If absolutely everything, from the flight of a bird to the incredibly complex laws of quantum physics, boils down to this fundamental teleosyntactic medium, how is the potential for everything that will ever exist already written into the very code of the universe? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.